Okay, so I am back, and in today's video, I wanted to cover a very interesting topic. As we all know, many teams have had an absolute carousel at the quarterback position, and many starting quarterbacks have lost their jobs. So in today's video, I want to cover 8 different quarterbacks who were either starters coming into the season, or ultimately did become the starter at some point in the season, who lost their jobs, or are going to lose their jobs. If you guys are confused by the concept, just continue to watch the video, and I'll kind of explain it as we go along. But without further ado, let's just hop right into it. And we are going to start off this video with Desmond Ridder, the Atlanta Falcons quarterback. And I think this one's kind of obvious. He obviously came into this season as the full-time starter and has had a very unproductive season. On the year, he only has 2,545 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, and has been benched multiple times for guys like Taylor Heinicke. And when you get benched for Taylor Heinicke, that should basically say it all. Desmond Ridder has not been very good this year and has been the reason why the Atlanta Falcons did not make the playoffs. And this Falcons team is absolutely loaded with talent, especially on the offensive side of things, and for Desmond Ridder to be this bad and for that offense to be that bad, it says a lot about how bad of a quarterback he actually is. This is a team that's either going to draft a quarterback in this upcoming draft, or potentially going to trade for a quarterback like Justin Fields, or potentially get a guy like Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson. If you want to know more about how I feel about this Atlanta Falcons team, I just made a video on them, so make sure you check that video out after this video, but make sure you stay tuned for the rest of this list. But next up, we have Jimmy Garoppolo, the former starting quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders. And yet again, very similar to Desmond Ridder, Jimmy Garoppolo was the starting quarterback to enter this season, and after the embarrassment of a game to the Detroit Lions, he was replaced with Aiden O'Connell. On the year, Jimmy Garoppolo only had 1,205 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, and was pretty bad in basically every game he played. And I think I speak for all Raiders fans here that we did not want Jimmy Garoppolo to be the starting quarterback heading into this season, because it was basically a guarantee that at some point this year he was going to be benched, and the contract that we gave him was just going to end up kicking our ass later on. And that problem was compounded by the fact that our head coach and Josh McDaniels was absolutely horrible. Thank God he got fired. And I think, let's be honest about what Jimmy Garoppolo is. He was a system quarterback with the San Francisco 49ers who was carried by the talent around him, and when he was given the keys to an organization with not as much talent, he struggled. And that's despite the fact that he was in a familiar system with Josh McDaniels and with an offense that, again, not as talented as San Francisco, but has some quality pieces like Devontae Adams, Michael Mayer, Hunter Renfrow, so on and so forth. And I think moving forward, it's pretty obvious that Jimmy Garoppolo is just going to be a backup quarterback wherever he goes. I think he'll be a very solid backup quarterback for whatever team wants him. I just don't think he's going to be the starting quarterback for a team anytime soon. But moving on, we have a very controversial pick, and I know a lot of Steelers fans are not going to like this, but Kenny Pickett. And I think we can all be honest about Kenny Pickett. He's not a very good quarterback. On this season, he only had 2,070 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, and that is in a 12-game span. In fact, he has 6 games without a single touchdown, and in those 6 games, he's played pretty bad in all of them. Yet despite that, he had a winning record, and that's the defense that a lot of fans have for Kenny Pickett. Sure, Kenny Pickett can sometimes create magic in the 4th quarter and can lead the team to victory, but he is not a future franchise quarterback. And I also understand that a lot of fans are going to blame Matt Canada for the lack of progress from Kenny Pickett, but I'm not going to put all the blame on an offensive coordinator. Sometimes it's up to the quarterback to make plays for himself. There is not a really special attribute about Kenny Pickett. He's not a great thrower, he's not extremely athletic, he's not great with anticipation. I don't really know what system he fits in. And let's be honest, Mason Rudolph in 3 games has played better than Kenny Pickett has in 12 games. Mason Rudolph in the 2 games that he's been the starter has 564 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, and has beaten teams like the Seattle Seahawks and the Cincinnati Bengals. And the comical thing about it is that Kenny Pickett did not have a single 30-point game this season, whereas with Mason Rudolph, they've had 2 back-to-back 30-point games. And I get it, Seattle and Cincinnati don't have the best defenses, but against the Cincinnati Bengals back in November 26th, Kenny Pickett only was able to put up 16 points. And I'm not here to bash on Kenny Pickett. I think that he has a future position as a backup quarterback for the NFL for many years. And let's keep it a buck, being a backup quarterback is not a bad thing. He's making millions of dollars to sit on a bench, whereas I'm making $0 to make YouTube videos. And another thing, he might be the starting quarterback for this team next year. I would not be very surprised, but I just don't think moving forward he's going to be a starting quarterback for much longer. I think if there's one person on this list who I'm going to be wrong about, it is probably going to be Kenny Pickett, but I'm willing to die on this hill that I don't think he's going to be the franchise quarterback moving forward. But let's go ahead and move on from that. And again, I kind of think I have a bit of a controversial one here, but I don't think it's that controversial. It's going to be Daniel Jones, the New York Giants' former starting quarterback. And after a season where he had 3,205 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, the New York Giants decided to give him an absolute massive contract, and this year, in the 6 games that he played, he was very disappointing. In the 6 games he played, he had 909 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, and only had 1 game with 2 touchdowns, so the rest of the games he had 0 touchdowns and interceptions in most of them. And I understand this New York Giants team is not just loaded with talent and the offensive line is absolutely horrible, but Daniel Jones was also a huge part of the problem. Go back to week 1 and watch that Cowboys game. He was absolutely horrible, and it's such a shame because he was actually pretty decent in 2022 with the New York Giants. I recently watched back his wildcard game against the Minnesota Vikings, and I was missing that Daniel Jones this current season. And the part that kind of sucks the most about it is I think Daniel Jones had a better roster this year than he did last year. Like, offensively speaking, I will admit I think the offensive line did take a step back, or especially early on this season. But when you look at the weapons, you add Jalen Hyatt, who is a high-flying receiver who can catch the balls down the field. You also added Darren Waller, who is a yak machine at the tight end position. Yet despite that, this offense was absolutely anemic until a guy in Tommy DeVito came in, and now it's Tyrod Taylor who's looking pretty damn good right now. You're getting outplayed by Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito. That's a bad look for Daniel Jones, and I just don't know if this team is going to have him as their franchise quarterback moving forward. I think the one that makes this more distinct than the other names I've mentioned is that Daniel Jones just got paid. Like, yes, Jimmy Garoppolo did get paid, but he did not get a massive bag like Daniel Jones just got. Daniel Jones just got a 4-year deal. Granted, there is a kind of, I want to say, like a 2 or 3 year out for them, but you still gave him that massive deal, and you're still going to have to pay him his fully guaranteed money. And right now, I just don't know if this franchise trusts him moving forward, especially after the year he just had. So I think it's very likely this team goes out there and potentially takes a quarterback in this year's draft to eventually replace Daniel Jones. And as someone who was not a fan of the Daniel Jones contract when it happened, I'm not very shocked by this outcome. Now let's go ahead and move on to a quarterback who recently has started playing very well, but I still think he's going to get replaced at some point in this upcoming season or potentially this offseason, and that is Derek Carr, the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Now, statistically speaking, he's kind of saved his season with this most recent 4-game stretch, because on the year he has 3,614 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. However, 10 of his 21 touchdowns come in the last 4 games, and 2 of his 8 interceptions have come in the last 4 games as well. So before that, he only had 11 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, and I'm not going to do the math for the yards, but I guarantee you it was a lot less than 3,000. And while I don't think Derek Carr has been the biggest problem for the New Orleans Saints, I just think it's a matter of time for him to eventually get replaced by a younger quarterback. And there's several reasons why I think that. Number one, Derek Carr has not been a very good quarterback this year. We can all keep it a buck. Yes, I know his most recent 4-game stretch has looked very good, but he still has not been very great. At the end of the day, this was supposed to be their all-in season of them trying to make a deep playoff run, but they currently only sit at 8-8 and need a lot of help to get into the playoffs this year. When you're in a division in the NFC South that is only going to continue to get better, I just don't know if the Saints team can withstand Derek Carr being their quarterback moving forward. You also have to look at this from a salary cap situation. Derek Carr's getting paid a ton of money, and the Saints don't have a ton of money to give out. So next year, I fully expect the Saints roster to look completely different than it is this year because their salary cap situation is an absolute travesty, and I think one of those casualties could be Derek Carr. If I was the Saints, I think moving on from Derek Carr has to be the #1 priority. At the end of the day, the quarterback gets paid probably the most of the team, and you can get a young franchise quarterback like Bo Nix, Michael Penix, so on and so forth in this year's draft to come in and have a cheaper deal and probably play a little bit better. Now, I think for Derek Carr's sake, I don't really know if this is his last time being the starting quarterback for a team. I could definitely see him moving on to a different franchise and being the starter over there, but I just have a hard time thinking any team is going to tell their fans that Derek Carr is going to be their franchise quarterback, just because I don't think there's any franchise that wants him to be their starting quarterback. I think the only franchise that might be willing to take on Derek Carr and tell their fans that he's going to be their starting quarterback would be the Raiders. And as a Raiders fan, of course, I would love Derek Carr to come back, but maybe not as our starting quarterback. I just have a hard time imagining that any team is going to tell their fan base that, hey, Derek Carr is going to be your franchise quarterback and it's going to carry us to a Super Bowl, because I just don't think that's the case. Again, I think the only team that would really be willing to take on Derek Carr to potentially be a starter would be the Las Vegas Raiders, but I think we kind of saw what happened last year. So I don't know. I think he's poised to be a backup quarterback for many years to come at this point. But moving on, I actually have 2 quarterbacks in one because they both play for the same team, and that is, of course, Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. We're going to talk about Bailey Zappi first because I think it's a lot more simple for him. And I think it's time we be very honest about Bailey Zappi. He's a career backup. On the season, he only has 1,184 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, and has a QBR of 33.5. And in case you're wondering, a QBR of 33.5 is not very good. Now, you can blame the system, and I'm not going to disagree with you, but let's just be honest about Bailey Zappi. There's just nothing really special about him. He doesn't have a particularly great arm. He doesn't make great decisions. I think his pocket awareness is very lacking right now. But I think as a pure backup, I think he's a very good backup. I think if you're talking about any team, I think they would love to have Bailey Zappi as their backup because he comes in and won't lose you games, but could potentially win you some games just off of his abilities. But I think when it comes down to it, I just don't imagine any team going in there with Bailey Zappi as their starting quarterback. Whereas with Mac Jones, I actually do think Mac Jones could potentially be a starting quarterback in a different system. I think the thing with Mac Jones is that he hasn't played great this year. Obviously, he's had some very bad games, but I think we've seen enough flashes over his career to at least give him a bit of a pass for his recent performances. And I think if a team like Minnesota or Denver or Atlanta was to bring in Mac Jones, I do think he could have potentially a career year. I think the thing with Mac Jones is he needs an offensive-minded head coach who knows what he's doing with Mac Jones, which is kind of precisely what you're going to get in Kevin O'Connell and Sean Payton. Maybe not so much with Arthur Smith, but I do imagine he's going to get fired at this point. But again, we run into the issue that I just had with Derek Carr. What franchise is going to tell their fan base that Mac Jones is their future quarterback? I think it would have to be a very particular case where they maybe aren't able to take a top-tier quarterback in this year's draft, so they're going to be kind of forced to take Mac Jones. But I don't know, there's just so much talent with quarterbacks in this year's draft that I just imagine I'd rather have any of the top 5 or maybe top 6 quarterbacks of this upcoming draft over a guy like Mac Jones. But I do imagine that some team is willing to give him a chance as their franchise quarterback. I look at a team like Atlanta, who already has a kind of established roster, who might want to take on a guy like Mac Jones. And I personally don't view Mac Jones as a completely lost cause. I think he has some abilities. I just think right now his abilities with the Patriots are over with. I don't think he has the ability to carry a bad Patriots offense. But yet again, I'm going to repeat this. I think if you put him on a team, let's say like Atlanta or Minnesota, who has the pieces already established, I think he could be a decent quarterback there. Maybe not a Super Bowl Bowl level quarterback, but somebody who could definitely carry that team to a playoff spot. Again, if you already have an established roster with a good offensive line and good weapons and a good offensive-minded head coach, I definitely do think that Mac Jones could find success over there. Think of all the quarterbacks I'm going to talk about in this video, I have the most hope for Mac Jones in his future just because I've seen enough flashes of what he can be. But lastly, and this one kind of hurts my soul, of course it's Zach Wilson. Obviously, he at no point this season was supposed to be the starting quarterback. It was supposed to be Aaron Rodgers the entire year, but after the Aaron Rodgers injuries, he was forced back into the starting spot. I think it's time we be honest with Zach Wilson real quick. He's just not the quarterback of the future for the New York Jets. Despite flashes in certain games this year and sometimes playing like a very good quarterback, he's just not the guy. Because right now, his inconsistency and inefficiencies are outweighing what he is good at right now. And I think right now it could be beneficial for both the Jets and Zach Wilson to mutually part ways. I think if you're the Jets, if you go out there and potentially get a backup quarterback in this upcoming draft, or maybe an established one in this offseason, I think that could be beneficial for them. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is only getting older, and I do think you want an established guy. So if you go out there and let's say get a guy like Joshua Dobbs to back up Aaron Rodgers, and then you go out in this draft and take a guy like Cam Ward with your second or third round pick, I think that's a pretty good offseason for your quarterback room, because that brings you a guy who can come in this upcoming season if Aaron Rodgers was to go down for a couple games, while also having a developmental piece in a guy like Cam Ward. Joshua Dobbs and Cam Ward are just names that came to mind when I thought of this video, but again, if you want to find somebody similar to them, an established veteran backup and a young rookie quarterback who can come in and develop, I definitely do think that is a smart move for them to take. And as it goes for Zach Wilson, I think leaving the Jets is the best way to go. I think the Jets have consistently shown that they are not willing to commit to him, and I just don't know if you can learn enough from Aaron Rodgers in one season to really turn around your career. And I have one spot that I think would perfectly fit Zach Wilson for him to sit on the bench and learn under a franchise quarterback to eventually at some point take over another franchise, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, you sit behind Patrick Mahomes for 2 to 3 years, you take the Geno Smith route, and then eventually a new job opening opens up, you take that spot and you dominate. Like I said, you take the Geno Smith route, you sit on the bench, you learn, you get better, you develop, you get better, you get better, you get better, and then eventually you take the starting spot of another team. And hopefully that team that you take over already has an established offensive line and already has an established receiving core, because right now the Jets don't have an established offensive line and they don't trust Zach Wilson. So again, take that route, go to a team like Kansas City, sit for a few years, then eventually take over a new team and then become the starting quarterback then. Obviously that probably is not going to happen, but I do think it would be the right route for him to go down. But everyone, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think of all the players I talked about. Do you think these players still have a potential starting spot moving forward, or do you think I'm pretty spot on with what I said? And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because that would help me out a ton. Again, we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so again, make sure to hit that subscribe button because it helps me out a ton. But I love you guys. Peace.